morning. So this summer, we are taking a road trip with Jesus. Everybody's piling in the truck, and we're going to follow him on the road. We're going to be listening to the stories that he told, the lessons that he taught as he walked from place to place with his disciples and with anyone who would listen. Now, last week we talked about how even before you start a good road trip, you need a good soundtrack. You need the good stuff to listen to that helps the miles go easier. And we said last week how the best thing to listen to on the road is Jesus, because he's got a lot to tell us, and he's going to lead us through. Well, this week we'll find out why that's going to come in so handy. Because as road trips go, they don't always go smoothly, do they? You can plan your road trip out down to the mile. You can map out the exact course you want to take. But nothing can prepare you when you run into a detour. I hate detours. Detours take you off course. Any other thing that happens to you on the road, like a flat tire or traffic, that's fine. You're still on that road. But a detour takes you off that planned route and starts shuttling you in places that you never planned on going. Now, some detours are brief. They just take you around the block, and then you're back on your way. But other detours, they take you down this winding path with twists and turns. And suddenly you're like, but the road is way back there. Where am I going? How am I going to get back to it? And then you start looking around and it's like, I don't know where I am. And you've been looking around. Now you don't know if you've missed a sign that pointed you back to the road. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been pounding on the steering wheel? Where the heck is that stupid sign? Okay, I'm not alone. Well, the road of life is full of detours. From the quick and annoying ones that just take you off course for a second, to those that take you to places you don't want to go. And we see in our gospel how Jesus can help us deal with those detours that take us so far off our planned route. Jesus is teaching by the lakeside when a desperate father named Jairus comes running up to him. Now, this man's life took a terrifying detour, a detour into every parent's worst nightmare. And he runs up to Jesus and he says, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come, lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." Now, Jairus was a synagogue official. And the synagogue, they weren't that big of fans of Jesus. A lot of them plotted against him. And we don't know where Jairus was, if he was involved in that or not. All we know is that whatever he had against Jesus, whatever his people had against Jesus, he put that all aside and ran to Jesus because he knew that Jesus was his only hope. And so Jesus goes with him. And so does the crowd. But in that crowd is another person whose life has taken a detour. A woman who is identified only by her illness. We never get her name, just what was wrong with her. It says, now there was a woman who'd been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years. That means she's been bleeding for 12 years. She endured much under many physicians and spent all that she had. And she was no better. Rather, she grew worse. That sounds like a lot of people today whose lives have been detoured so much that it seems like they're on a roadblock, where your life is on hold. And you can't get back to the road you're on because you're stuck. all roads you're on now lead to the doctor's office. And your money is detoured too, into the medical bills. Her illness put her whole life on hold. But more than that, it isolated her. See, the added tragedy of her situation was that she was an outcast from the people. See, blood was unclean. And among the Jews of that day, that if you came into contact with someone who was bleeding, or if you were bleeding, you had to go through this complex purification ritual that would declare you clean eventually. But she's continually bleeding for 12 years. There's no purification, and nobody wants to go near her or touch her. It's an inconvenience at best. And so people avoided her for 12 years. So she was disappointed in her doctors, broke, and alone. Life is going to detour us to places we don't want to go. But what I want you to remember is this. When you run into a detour, follow the signs. That's how you get out of one, right? You follow the signs. That's why they make them bright orange and visible. So you can't say, oh, I didn't see it. This is what Jairus and this woman do. Because all the signs of God's activity among them had pointed to Jesus. And so they followed those signs until they found Jesus. Jairus risked his reputation in the synagogue to run after Jesus to ask for help. This unclean woman risked ridicule and condemnation by pushing her way through the crowd so that she could reach out just to touch the hem of Jesus' robe. Both of them believed enough about Jesus to know that he could help. But what they got was so much more. How do we deal with detours? We do what Jesus tells Jairus in verse 36. He says, do not fear, only believe. Say that with me. Do not fear, only believe. Jesus takes these two and he does way more than heal them. He leads them through their detours to show them just who he is and how great is God's love for them. He does this first with this woman. Look, be real. He didn't have to acknowledge her. He was in a rush. There was a child's life at stake. All she did was touch his robe anyway. She didn't get in his face about it. No one would have blamed him if he just walked by her. But no, he stops. He makes a big fuss about it. Until she comes terrified to him and tells him what she did. She was afraid because would he condemn her? Would he criticize her? Now I'm unclean. I got to go wash up. Would he charge her for healing? She didn't have any money. So she was pretty afraid. But what does he do? He stops, he faces her, and he says to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Daughter, not woman. Daughter. He speaks to her like she's one of his family. He lets her know that she's just as important a daughter to him as the one he's rushing to save. See, in calling her daughter, he does more than just heal her bleeding. He heals her soul because she's no more an outcast, not from people or God. She can be among people again. But think of this, for 12 years she'd been bleeding and suffering. What must she have felt about her closeness to God? Daughter. God has not abandoned you. God is calling you daughter. It's a word of embrace. She will live her life rejoicing in Jesus, not just because she was healed, but because she knows that she is loved. And Jairus? Well, men came to tell him, your daughter's dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. What a stupid request. Don't bother Jesus. They tell him not to bother because they have no hope. They can't fix what happened. She's dead. But they don't know Jesus. And before Jairus could even process this news, Jesus tells him, do not fear, only believe. Say it with me. Do not fear, only believe. How many miles on the road of life do we waste walking in fear? Fear of what's coming down the road. Fear of what's around the next bend. Fear that we are a bother to God. That He's too busy for us. Or worse, may reject us. Fear because we're losing hope and we think we're at a dead end. Listen to Jesus. Do not fear. Only believe. Believe that you are not a bother to God. You are God's daughter and son who He loves. Believe that God won't reject anyone that reaches out to Him in faith. Don't be afraid to put your hope and your trust and your life in His hands. Because then, like He did with Jairus and this woman, He will show you just who He is and how great is His love for you. Jairus' daughter was dead. But something in Jairus made him hold out hope and bring Jesus home. And Jesus took Jairus and his wife and 3 of his closest disciples inside the home, away from the crowd, because what he was about to do and show them wasn't for the crowds as a spectacle. It was for them to see personally just how great God's love is for them. He takes his daughter's hand and gently says, "Little girl, wake up." He commands life from death with no more effort than waking a child up from her nap. And in that moment, Jesus shows who He truly is. And He overwhelms them with God's presence and His power and His love. And they rejoiced. They rejoiced that day. They rejoiced every day. Every time they tucked her in, every time they woke her up in the morning, they rejoiced throughout her life. They rejoiced in Jesus Christ because God was present among them and loved them. Here's the thing, Jesus didn't lead either Jairus or this woman back to the road that they were on. No, He led them through their detours to a better road. A road that led deeper and deeper into the love and joy of God. Now, I don't know how Jesus will lead you through your detours, or how long it will take. But what I do know is, however He does it, you will find Him greater. And you'll rejoice in Him more if you just follow the signs. If you reach out to Him in faith, stick close to Him on the road. Look for the signs that He puts up for you through His Word, through prayer, through those brothers and sisters in Christ who have their own stories of detours and joy. Don't be afraid whenever life detours you. Just believe. Last week we gave out travel journals. There's still some available. I encourage you to take one, or if you've taken one already, or even if you haven't, I want you to consider this for this week. How has Jesus turned your detour into a blessing? If you can't think of one, ask someone else, because they have a story about it, I'm sure. Amen.